to the community, and they're not coming back for their hearings. It's still unacceptable.
Senator Franken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Sessions, welcome back. The last time we spoke, I asked you about Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election.
Put that down here.
There is now absolutely no question that the Russians meddled in the election in order to undermine confidence in American democracy, to damage the campaign of Hillary Clinton, and to boost Donald Trump. Our intelligence agencies have confirmed this. We also know that there were many contacts and communications between Russian operatives and Trump campaign officials and associates. Now, in order to make sure that this kind of attack never happens again, we need to understand what happened and whether anyone inside the Trump campaign assisted the Russian effort. During your confirmation hearing, I asked you, and I quote, if there is any evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign, what will you do? That was a simple, straightforward question. What will you do? The implication was, will you recuse yourself? But rather than answer that question, you replied, quote, I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians, close quote. That was on January 10th. On February 8th, you were confirmed, and on March 1st, the Washington Post published a story that you met with Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, twice during the campaign, once in July on the 18th and once on September 8th. And it was later reported that you met with the Russian ambassador a third time at the Mayflower Hotel in April of 2016. Confronted with these reports, you subtly changed your story. Your answer under oath before this committee was that you, quote, did not have communications with the Russians, period. But on the morning that the story broke, you said, quote, I have not met with any Russians at any time to discuss any political campaign. On Twitter, you said, quote, I never met with any Russian officials to discuss issues of the campaign. So, confronted with the truth, you started to qualify your answer. Later, in a letter you sent to this committee to clarify your testimony and to disclose 2 of your 3 meetings, you wrote, quote, I do not recall any discussions with the Russian ambassador or any other representative of the Russian government regarding the political campaign on these occasions or any other occasions. But this summer, the Washington Post reported that American intelligence agencies intercepted communications between the Russian ambassador and Moscow, in which he described 2 of his conversations with you, the April meeting at the Mayflower Hotel and the July meeting at the Republican National Convention. Citing both former and current U.S. officials, the intercepts reportedly indicate that you had, quote, substantive, unquote, discussions on policy matters important to Moscow. According to officials familiar with Russian intelligence reports, the ambassador was well known for accurately relaying his interactions with U.S. officials back to the Kremlin. Attorney General Sessions, in response to this report, the Justice Department declined to comment on the veracity of the intelligence intercepts, but DOJ did assert that you did, quote, not discuss interference in the election, which is also how you describe your communications to the Senate Intelligence Committee. So again, the goalpost has been moved. First it was, I did not have communications with Russians, which was not true. Then it was, I never met with any Russians to discuss any political campaign, which may or may not be true. Now it's, I did not discuss interference in the campaign, which further narrows your initial blanket denial about meeting with the Russians. Since you have qualified your denial to say that you did not, quote, discuss issues of the campaign with Russians, what, in your view, constitutes issues of the campaign?
Well, let me just say this without hesitation, that I conducted no improper discussions with Russians at any time regarding a campaign or any other item facing this country.
Okay, how do you
And
know?
I want to say that first. And that's been the suggestion that you've raised and others, that it was somehow we had conversations that were improper.
May I
number one.
suggest that?
No. You had a long time, Senator Franken. I'd like to respond. I think I
Okay.
have a.
Well, note that Senator Cruz went 2 minutes over, so I don't want,
Well-
they're going to cut me off, and so I want to ask you some questions.
No, I don't, Mr. Chairman, I don't have to sit in here and listen to his
You're the one who
charges
testified.
without having a chance to respond. Give me a break.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead. Take whatever
It
time.
was not a simple question, Senator Franken.
I'm sorry?
It was not a simple question. The lead in to your question was very, very troubling. And I answered to you in a way that I felt was responsive to what you raised in your question. Let me read it to you. You said, CNN has just published a story, meaning that day, while we were in the hearing, that none of us had heard about.
Keep reading.
And I'm telling you this about this news story that's just been published. I'm not expecting you to know whether or not it's true, but CNN just published a story alleging that the intelligence community, that's of the United States of America, provided documents to the president-elect last week that included information that, quote, Russian operatives claimed to have compromising personal and financial information about Mr. Trump. You went on to say these documents also allegedly say, quote, there was a continuing exchange of information during the campaign between Trump's surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government. Now, again, I'm telling you this as it's coming out, so you know, but if it's true, it's obviously extremely serious, and if there's any evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign, what will you do? So, taken aback by this dramatic statement that I'd never heard before and knew nothing about, I responded this way. Senator Franken, I'm not aware of those activities. I have been called a surrogate a time or two in this campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it. I don't think that can fairly be interpreted as saying I never had conversations with any Russians. It was referring directly to the suggestion that there was a continuing exchange of information between Trump surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government, which did not happen, at least not to my knowledge, and not with me. And that's why I responded the way I do. And I'm disappointed. Yes, you can say what you want to about the accuracy of it, but I think it was a good faith response to a dramatic event at the time. And I don't think it's fair for you to suggest otherwise.
3 minutes and then finish?
He took more than 3 minutes.
No, he didn't.
Yeah.
It took about 2.5. Well, go.
no,
How much do you want? I don't want
That
to
is
take a
not
lot
true.
of time bargaining with you.
Well, I didn't take as much time as Senator Franken
Hey,
took.
Hey, let me just deal with Senator Franken. 3 more minutes, please.
Okay, first of all, you said I did not have communications with the Russians. This was about ongoing communications. You had 3 communications with Kislyak. And now you can't recall, with answering Senator Leahy, you can't recall whether you discussed what you discussed with Kislyak.
What I would
And
say
so,
to you is,
please.
okay, go ahead. You go make a lot of allegations, Senator. It's hard for me to respond to
I'm
them
not-
in the
I
time
am
I've got.
Can I have a little bit more time? Okay. You have said today in response to Senator Leahy that you don't recall whether you talked about the campaign, whether you don't recall whether you talked about issues and Trump's views on issues with Russia. Those are very, very relevant to the campaign, whether a surrogate from the campaign is talking with the Russian ambassador about the candidate's views on Russian policy, especially at the Republican National Convention, at the Mayflower Hotel the day before Trump is going to give his maiden speech on foreign policy. That's very different. Not being able to recall what you discussed with him is very different than saying I have not had, or how your responses morphed from I did not have communications with the Russians to I did not discuss substantive. I did not discuss the political campaign, and then finally going to I did not discuss interference in the election. That to me is moving the goalpost every time, and we're starting off with an extra point, and by the end we're going to a 75-yard field goal. If it has to be us, saying I didn't discuss interfering with the election is your last statement, that's a very different bar than I can tell you I did not meet with any Russians.
Relatively short answer.
So he gets to do about 10 minutes improperly framing this subject, and I'm given a short chance to respond?
Proceed, please. But then we're going
You're
to call on
spending,
Senator
first
Sass.
and foremost, Senator Franken, you and I have had a good relationship on this committee. I would tell my colleagues, I think most of you know, I've committed myself to a high level of public service, to reach the highest standards of ethics and decency in my service, to be honest about things that I say. And so you have now gone through this long talk that I believe is totally unfair to me. It all arose from this question. When it was charged that these documents allegedly say, quote, there was a continuing exchange of information during the campaign between Trump's surrogates, as if all of them, Trump's surrogates, and intermediaries for the Russian government. Isn't that what you said? You're shaking your head.
No, don't all Trump surrogates.
It said Trump's surrogates. Didn't say some of. It said his surrogates. And I felt a need to respond. And I responded on the spot. We've been 6 hours in the hearing, the end of the day, and I said, I'm not aware of those activities. And I wasn't, and am not. I don't believe they occurred. And I said, I have been called a surrogate a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians. I'm unable to comment on it. I was talking about as a surrogate in the campaign. I didn't have a continuing series, a continuing exchange of information. So now everything else, so now you take that to say if I ever met with a Russian, I've not been candid with the committee, and I reject that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Attorney General. I'd like to just touch on our last conversation and then move on to
Don't
the-
spend all your money, all your time just touching on it.
I would like my 5 seconds back. Okay.
you
I
can
want to touch on the DOJ, then go to the DOJ's record on LGBT people, on their rights. I just want to get this clear. At the end of your answer, at the end there, you said, I felt the need to respond, and I responded on the spot. This is a interim transcript, so I may have it wrong, but this is how I recollect it as well. It's been 6 hours in the hearing. It's at the end of the day, and I said I'm not aware of those activities, which is the surrogates with communications with the Russians. And I wasn't and am not. I don't believe they occurred. Now, was that what you're saying, that you don't believe that surrogates from the Trump campaign had communications with the Russians? Is that what you're saying?
I did not, and I'm not aware of anyone else that did. And I don't believe it happened. But
and you don't believe it now?
I don't believe it happened.
So let me ask you, that's what I wanted to ask you. Do you believe that Michael Flynn was a surrogate for the campaign?
He could probably have been defined as that.
Do you believe that Paul Manafort was a surrogate for the campaign?
Well, for a short time, he was a chairman of the campaign chairman.
Do you believe that Jared Kushner was a surrogate for the campaign?
I really don't know whether his role I sort of see, there's no clear definition, I assume, but a surrogate, someone normally that's speaking on behalf of the
Do you believe
candidate.
Donald Trump Jr. was a surrogate for the campaign?
Well, he was his son, and he spoke.
Okay. Just wanted to know that. I'd like to talk about the department's record on protecting the rights of LGBT people. On Monday, it was reported that you personally directed DOJ to send a federal prosecutor to assist in the hate crimes prosecution of a man charged with murdering a transgender teenager in Iowa. And I will be the first to say that DOJ should be lauded for doing so. Far too often, crimes targeting LGBT people and specifically transgender women of color go unreported and uninvestigated. But your decision to prosecute this hate crime incident doesn't tell the whole story. Since your confirmation, DOJ has wasted no time in systematically undermining attempts to safeguard LGBT people from discrimination by revoking policies designed to protect them and declining to defend their rights in court. For example, DOJ revoked guidelines designed to make schools safe and welcoming places for LGBT students. DOJ argued that federal civil rights laws don't protect lesbian, gay, or bisexual workers from job discrimination. DOJ asserted that transgender people don't deserve federal protection from discrimination at work. DOJ lawyers are defending the president's ban on transgender troops in court. And DOJ issued a sweeping new order directing the government to accommodate people with anti-LGBT views, which could potentially allow them to sidestep laws banning discrimination at work, in school, and in public accommodations, all in the name of religious liberty. General Session, there's an argument to be made that no single Trump administration officials has done more to hurt LGBT people than you. Your actions stand in stark contrast to the promises you made when you last appeared before this committee. Back then, you said that you, quote, understand the demands for justice and fairness made by our LGBT community, and you promised to, quote, ensure that the statutes protecting their civil rights and their safety are fully enforced. But instead, under your leadership, DOJ has demonstrated an unrelenting hostility to LGBT people. Attorney General Sessions, when DOJ argues that LGBT people aren't worthy of protection from discrimination and harassment at work or at school, or that businesses shouldn't have to serve LGBT people if they don't want to, that emboldens those who seek to do them harm. How do you reconcile your decision to prosecute an anti-transgender hate crime, which I applaud, which is meant to deter future incidents of violence, the hate crime laws, with aggressively pursuing an agenda that gives cover to discrimination and hate.
Senator Franken, I would reject the phrase unrelenting hostility. We do not, this Department of Justice has no hostility to transgender or sexual orientation issues. In fact, we follow the law scrupulously, as I promised to do. With regard to several of the job employment issues you raised, that is directly controlled by Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And Title VII of the Civil Rights Act has never been held, or at least by the Department of Justice under the entire 8 years of the Obama administration, to include these protections. And there are 11 courts of appeals. My understanding that 10 of the 11 courts of appeals all agree that it's not protected by the employment law under Title VII. Only one circuit has recently reversed that position. So the position we're taking is the President Obama, Eric Holder, Lynch position in the Title VII issue. On Title IX, the education, the schools question, it likewise is not covered, in our opinion, in the same way that Title VII is not covered, does not cover this employment issue. The Department of Justice, or really the Department of Education, sent a directive to states telling them that they had to accommodate transgender individuals in their choice of bathrooms. We felt the law did not answer that. We felt that the states and localities could make their own decisions.
That's at odds with what the Obama administration.
That's at odds with the Obama administration. We did reverse that, but we believe it's consistent with law.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.